Hello everyone, I'm Vrinda Gupta, faculty at National Institute of Public Finance and Policy. So welcome to the podcast series of NIPFP. Today we'll be talking on central bank's dilemma on commodity and supply shocks. Now in today's world with rising economic uncertainties, countries setting their energy transitions and increase in climate related shocks, it becomes very important to view monetary policy from that perspective. And for discussing this topic, we have with us our in-house expert, Dr. Rudrani Bhattacharya. So, ma'am predominantly works on macro-related issues, and she holds a PhD in quantitative economics from Indian Statistical Institute. Welcome, ma'am, to the podcast series.
Thanks, Vrinda. Thanks for inviting me to this series.
Starting with the first question for you, ma'am. Why do commodity price spikes and supply side shocks create such a dilemma for central banks? And what makes these shocks harder to respond to compared to the demand-driven inflation?
So, central banks face dilemma on price stabilization versus boosting economic activities in situations when there are commodity price boom, which are actually coming from their supply side, the shortage of commodities or something, or some other sort of cost push inflation is happening in the economy due to, say, the rise in prices in the intermediate inputs. So, to understand why such dilemma arises, we need to understand what are the first round and second round effects that come from this kind of shocks. So, as soon as there is a, say, for example, there is a food price shock due to certain external factors that we often see in India, which is happening due to weather shock or something, or some global factors is driving that shock. For example, in 23-24, we have seen that wheat prices were skyrocketing because of the Russia-Ukraine war. So in this kind of situations, when there is a rise in commodity, any price of any commodity, the first round, it is going to transmit to the entire headline inflation if that particular commodity has a very high share in the basket. Like in India, we have food has a very high share in the basket, in the consumption basket. So that's the first round effect. Now for the second round effect, due to high prices, now the demand for food should decline. That's the economic theory of demand tells us, but that we do not see we can't see very strong decline in demand for food because food is not a perfect substitute with non-food items. You cannot substitute your bread, daily bread, with your clothes 1-to-1, right? So that substitution effect is weak. Again, so there's not much decline in the demand. And since there is an initial rise in prices, now the real income has declined. So there should be a negative real income effect on food demand, but that's also weak, which we know as Angel's law, that any decline in expenditure or demand will not reduce the demand for food 1-to-1. So because of these two reasons, the decline in food demand is not so strong when there is a food price shock. So in one hand, you have limited decline in demand for food and you have food prices have increased, so your food bill increases. So now you are having a cut in your budget. So how will you adjust? You will reduce the consumption of non-food items because you can now wear less, reduce 1 or 2 clothes items or other items, but you cannot reduce your food that much. So when that happens, so your non-food items demand declines, so your consumption declines, so the output production of that particular sector also declines. So that's the second round effect. Now when that happens, so what's the impact on the non-food prices? That can be mixed, because if the non-food demand falls enough, then you can have their prices may decline. But if there is wage price spiral sets up in the economy, so the production of the labor cost of production increases, then you can have a whole, inflationary situation in the whole economy, in all the sectors are affected by that. So in that kind of a scenario, you are going to have a stagflation. So you have a higher inflation, and because your non-food sector has become depressed, so you are in a stagflation scenario. So similar thing happens when there is a oil price shock, and if that is happening due to shortage of oil. So it will have a similar impact in the consumption side, because you cannot substitute oil and non-oil items one to one, and the real effect is also to some extent similar. But your product, the impact on output from the production side will be further aggravated, because now your oil consumption has declined, your oil use has declined, and if capital is complementary input with oil in the production, so capital services also decline. So that is going to have a large negative impact on output. Similar things happens when there is price of intermediate commodities increase, and intermediate commodities are complementary with capital, then similar things will happen. And if the producers pass on the intermediate cost prices to consumers, so you're going to have stagflation, this thing. So in this scenario, in one hand you have higher inflation and lower output. Now if the central bank wants to stabilize prices by tightening, doing some monetary tightening, so now your aggregate demand will further be depressed because of your consumption and investment moderation. So it is going to actually, so now in such a situation, you are going to have your price stabilization objective and your output stabilization objective. These two are working at a opposite direction, not at the same direction. So that is the source of dilemma during the commodity price shocks, and there is some sort of a supply shock.
Second question for you, ma'am. So, in face of persistent supply shocks like energy or food price surges, how should central banks balance the trade-off between controlling inflation and supporting growth?
So, central banks can efficiently try to address this sort of a problem with some sort of a notion of optimal monetary policy that allows them to minimize the output cost of inflation, which is the loss of output due to the price stabilization. So and that they can achieve through some sort of a credible monetary policy framework. For example, we all are familiar that around the world central banks exercise inflation targeting monetary policy, where there is a inflation rate set by the law of the country, and the bank has to maintain that rate over medium to longer period of time, even if there can be fluctuations in the rate, in that inflation rate in short term. So even there are fluctuations in the short term, if they have a credible policy framework that everybody in the economy know that the central bank is going to maintain this rate for the long period of time. So, and if they can communicate with clarity to the general people, to the market, so they will know, the economic agents will know that the bank is sincere about controlling the inflation. So the wage price spiral, the negotiation that happens in the market for salary hike and this thing, so that spiral becomes moderate, and then it's become easier for the central bank to stabilize prices, because the the amount of tightening they will need for that is not much, is not very high. So the cost of adjustment is also low. The output cost of adjustment is also low. The other way is the forward guidance. We all know that RBI also does this thing to give a sense to the market that what will be their course of monetary policy in the near future. And so when they do it, market general people and the market players, they can take long-term investment decisions based on the based on the what should be the policy target, what should be the target inflation rate. So there will be a sort of a stabilization happening in the economy rather than some abrupt changes in the economy, because with the forward guidance, now the economic agents know that what should be the stance of the central banks, where in which direction they are going to go, where should the inflation rate is going to go. So they can take their decisions, informed decisions, for a longer period of time. So longer investment decisions are much organized in these cases. So that happens to adjust the economy in a more smoothly, without much of the abrupt disturbances and changes. The other way is the gradual changes in the interest rate. So rather than without this sort of a framework where it is said that it is fixed that how much interest rate or a range of how much inflation rate or what a range of inflation rates are to be targeted. If it is not there, so and the central bank waits that till sufficient price pressure is there and they abruptly make some big changes in the interest rate, so the adjustment will also have the large cost, because there will be recession and the follow-up effects. So that can be avoided under this kind of framework, where IT framework, where it you change the interest rate slowly, and you giving the economy time to make the adjustments for these scenarios. Now, one thing that you need to keep in mind, that since monetary policy has limited effectiveness in addressing these supply side shocks, as it works through the aggregate demand channel. So when this kind of shocks arise in the economy, the central bank has also important role. Central government has also important roles to play. Not just you cannot control this in situations only with the monetary policy, with the central bank. Central government has also has to do change the taxes, maybe excise duties that we see happening in when oil prices are hiked, or create buffer stocks, so that during the food crisis the food prices can be managed, or create infrastructure, supply chain development. So these are also required. So what the central bank can do, that they can reduce the cost of investing in those kind of say for infrastructure building and these things. So it has to work in tandem with the central government to address the effects of supply shocks.
Now, third question for you, ma'am. So, how important is the anchoring of inflation expectations during supply shocks? And what communication strategies help central banks prevent temporary price pressures from becoming entrenched?
Yeah, absolutely. So we already said, I have said a lot of time that monetary policy is not fully effective in controlling the supply side shocks because of it works through the aggregate demand channel. So in when there are supply shocks are hitting the economy, managing inflation expectation is very important, because that's the only way they can reduce the wage spiral effect to take on, and by doing that the output adjustment cost is also minimized. So that's very important. And with clear communication with what kind of stances they are going to take, that this problem of supply shock, the effect of its effect on the inflation rate is a temporary effect, is not going to be there. They are going to maintain that particular rate of inflation for medium to long term. Communicating that clearly to the market is very important. So that they do through that inflation targeting framework allows them to do it. So similarly for RBI also, we have inflation targeting framework, and they communicate their policy stances in their every bi-monthly monetary policy statements. However, one limitation with this is that these bi-monthly statements are very much targeted to the market players, like not for the common people, not for the households who are actually the drivers of inflation expectations through the wage spiral, because it's very difficult for a common person to decode the bi-monthly statements. So central banks and including RBI should think a bit more about how to make it a more for the common people through mass media, something, so that's important.
So last question for you, ma'am. Given the increasing frequency of climate-related supply disruptions and energy transitions, do central banks need to rethink their policy frameworks, for example, integrating supply shocks or using new tools?
It's a very relevant question, very good question. So about integrating the supply shock indicators in their policy framework is already done in some sort of a as central banks around the world, they choose their inflation targeting indicator as the headline inflation, so which includes the indicators, the commodity prices also. So it's already taken care of. But regarding its role, monetary policy's role in green financing, in climate changing policies for the country, it certainly has some important role to play. For example, it can help in shifting from fossil fuel based investments to more greener investments by providing lower interest rate for those particular type of investments. So for example, providing targeted lending operation and differential collaterals that will reduce the interest rates for greener investment projects, and that will help the firms to take that. The other way it can do is they can buy the bonds, green bonds issued by the government as well as the corporations. So that will increase the price of those bonds and reduce the interest rate, and again it will be easier for the firms to invest for those kind of technology. Apart from that, collateral policy is also another way. For example, central banks can accept a wider range of green assets as collateral and provide credit against that. So that will help. That's also incentivize the firms to keep the green assets as the green financial assets as having the stock of that in a large number. But one thing that also we have to keep in mind, that this shifting in this type of investments may lead to certain some systemic changes in the financial system, and central bank will have to take into account these risks. There can be some risks associated with this green financing, so they have to take into account these risks in their stress test mechanism, in their regulatory framework. That will also allow the firms to have an idea that what are the type of risks associated with this kind of investment, and will help them to take decision or take plan for those kind of investment in a more organized and more effective way. So that's I think very important role to play by the central bank in that respect. Thank you.
So thank you, ma'am, for such nice insights. And yeah, so that's how we sum up our podcast.
Thank you, Vrinda.